The first is Emily Cloke, who is it's taking me time, the representative of His Majesty's government, and my entire life it's been Her Majesty, so it's taken a bit of getting used to. Consul General here in Los Angeles, with a whole list of other states to which she's accredited as well. She's had an enormously busy week. The British ambassador to the U.S. is in town this week, and so I really am very pleased we were able to get her to join us. She's got vast diplomatic experience. The celebrity posting she had for me, she served in Tehran. I'm the only one that gets really excited by that. She has served at the British Embassy in Sweden, and is originally a lawyer, studied law at Cambridge. Her responsibilities here they defy explanation. The UK has such massive interests in California and the West and in Southern California that she always looks remarkably calm to me. I don't quite know how she does it. James Arroyo and his wife, Mrs. Arroyo, who have joined us. We gave him an honorary doctorate, so he is now Dr. Arroyo. The least we could do. Is a former member of the British Foreign Ministry as well. He served in Europe, he served in the Middle East, and for the last decade at least has been the CEO of the Ditchley Foundation in the United Kingdom. Ditchley is outside of Oxford. It was created as a privately funded charity in 1958 by Sir David Wills. And Ditchley convenes some of the most remarkably interesting, engaging, important dialogues amongst people all over the world that are imaginable on all manner of different things. James has really kind of brought Ditchley into the next century in a whole variety of ways, and has been a uniquely impactful director and leader of Ditchley. What James and Emily are going to talk about are West Coast UK relations. The state of California has just breezed by Germany, and we now have the fourth largest economy in the world. And you know, I can sort of lay out all the cool stuff about Los Angeles, which I won't, but I could. But I'm also hoping James will talk a little bit about Ditchley, simply because as a thought leadership institute, I would say it's a national treasure, but it's actually a global treasure. And the Pacific Council has a long and productive relationship with Ditchley. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Emily and James, and thank them, and thank you all for joining us.
Hi everyone. Jerry, thank you so much for this wonderful event and for inviting us here. When I first came to Los Angeles, actually just over 2 years ago, I had an introductory meeting with Jerry on Zoom, and he mentioned this event to me, so I'm so glad that it's happened. So we're going to talk for about 20 minutes or so on the Ditchley Foundation's work, the role of organisations like Ditchley and the Pacific Council, and also touch on the UK, California, wider West Coast relationship, and then there'll be a chance for a bit of Q&A as well. So just linking to what Jerry has said about the global treasure that is Ditchley, the Ditchley Foundation. James, could you give us an overview about the work of the Foundation and some of the priority issues that you're focusing on?
Well, thanks very much, Emily, and thank you, Jerry, for that very warm and generous introduction. We actually had the honour of hosting Jerry and some, I think, prominent Pacific Council members at Ditchley before the pandemic, which was a great fun event. First some discussions on one of your world road trips, and I really enjoyed that. And I have long wanted to come back to talk to the council and to get back to LA. And this is my first trip since the pandemic, so it's just great to be here and to have this opportunity to talk to you. As Jerry said, I mean, one of the problems about Ditchley, I've actually been there 6.5 years, not quite a decade, One of the problems that Jerry suggested, one of the problems about Ditchley is there's nothing else like it. It's not a think tank. We don't have a permanent staff of people writing papers and doing studies. We have a large, very large stately home, a massive stately home in the Oxfordshire countryside, which was Churchill's wartime base in the early years of the war. And it features in books like Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson, in movies. And it's a storied location, a place, a kind of mythic location for the transatlantic relationship. John Kerry called it the spiritual home of the special relationship when he was talking in Ditchley. But that's not really the secret of Ditchley at all. The real point is the people. So Ditchley stands for a networked approach to the world, a networked approach to the problems of a connected world. In the sense that what we need to do, faced with these complicated, densely interconnected problems, is draw on global talent, global ideas, and we need to bring together people with genuine influence to try and shape the future. And we do that by studying different themes, by asking our friends who we should bring together, and then connecting people who, in their own hands, have a chance to shape different aspects of the future, from geopolitics to technology, to climate, to education, and so on. And the purpose of this is rooted in that sort of original idea of the transatlantic relationship. It's about trying to protect, strengthen, and at this current time, critically renew the vitality, the resilience of democratic societies, states, and alliances. Now, I always say all three, not just democracies, because all three are crucial. In democracies, you can't be strong outside unless you are stable and resilient inside. You're eaten away at the core if you lose that. And I think we all understand that after the last few years of politics in both your country and my country, no matter what your political beliefs. We need to have a strong and resilient democracy that commands respect in the world and commands the allegiance and loyalty of its people, a large majority of its people. So we have to work at that. The state itself has to be effective. One of the really worrying aspects of the last few years has been people talking about the efficiency of China, how much better they were at building railways, how much better they were at building airports. We were talking about LAX, but I know that we've got a lot of work going on. But it was always glorified. If only we could have a strong central government, we would have a gleaming LAX in which visitors would breeze. Well, look at the zero COVID policy, where that's got China now, and that's beginning to collapse. But I think we have to look at the efficiency of the state, the effectiveness of the state in democracies. And we need our alliances. We have to work on alliances and we have to build them. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here. We need alliances at multi-levels. The old world of capital to capital, Washington to London, top down, centralized, is dying. Instead, what we need to confront the reality of the world around us is an interconnected series of alliances, city to city, large states like California to comparable countries. As you said just now, Jerry, a bigger economy than Germany. That is extraordinary, given the number of people in California. I know there are issues, but that nonetheless is still extraordinary. So we need to kind of build this interconnected series of alliances at multiple levels. And that's why it's great to be here talking with Emily. Just a little bit more on the challenges, and we'll get into conversation. We face three concurrent sets of challenges, implicit in what I've just said, as democracies. External challenge, geopolitical competition from China strategically, but also at the moment violently from Russia in an extraordinarily brutal war in Europe, which we can talk about more if you want, but is looking really foreboding in terms of, even if we win, even if the Ukrainian side, the side we are supporting, wins in a sense, this is a bad outcome. Probably hundreds of thousands of Russians killed, even if we achieve our aims. This is not a great outcome, and we'll have to cope with it. China we've talked about. The internal challenges at the same time making everything difficult. The political polarization, the struggle to adapt to the technological revolution. And then we're trying to respond to increasingly clear evidence of rapid climate change effects. I know Governor Newsom has been leading on this in California really impressively, but there is so much to do and so difficult. And each of those challenges makes the other harder. So what do we do to move forward? I think that we need to make those connections across silos, across countries, across regions, to try and drive innovation and so prosperity. But we also need something more. We need stories. We need positive, inspiring stories about the future we are trying to build. We need dream factories. You need to reassert the American dream. We need to reassert the British dream. And we need to dramatize it. You have a place here that does some of that. And we need to kind of build a positive aspect for the future by working together to meet these challenges. I'm convinced we can do it, but it is a job of work, and that's no mistake. So that's what we're trying to work on. I'll stop, Emily.
Well, that was wonderful. I think you said a lot there that I'd like to get into a bit further. Your point about alliances on multi-levels, I think that's definitely something that would be valuable to talk about, particularly with what the UK Consulate does here in Los Angeles. I think the point just at the end on stories and the dream factory, I think that's critical. Just touching what you said in terms of threats and the war in Ukraine, it's an incredibly important issue for the British government and indeed allies across the world. The UK is committed to supporting Ukraine to defend itself and has done so in a range of different ways, whether it's the billions of military support, the economic, humanitarian, sanctioning individuals, entities in Russia and working multilaterally. James, could you say just a little bit more about how the Ditchley Foundation is approaching those very difficult challenges and how you work amongst your network? You talked about that networked approach to the world. Could you say a little bit more about the role of the foundation, how you support the action there?
Thanks, Emily. In terms of the war in Ukraine, I think one of the most significant things we've done in the last 6 years was the small conference we held on Russia's war in Ukraine in June last year. And it's a neat illustration of what we're trying to achieve. We had a real wealth of expertise on Russia. We had serving ambassadors as well as the previous ambassador to Moscow from the UK, but also from other countries too. We had advisors from the UK government, people trying to make Ukraine policy, plus people from the US. Crucially, we had General Cavoli, the new person who was just en route to take over the command of NATO and to be the supreme allied commander in Europe. And we were able to kind of work with General Cavoli and those present over a couple of days at Ditchley to think through the implications of what was happening, the politics as well as learning about the military situation. And the crucial thing at that point was that Russia was inexorably winning and advancing because the battlefield was tilted in their favor. But simply, they had longer artillery and they could just pound the Ukrainians from a safe distance, clear the area, move into it, and that's what was happening. And you can see the political window closing as we move forward. And then therefore was a rush to get the HIMARS, the advanced rocket systems, into there. I don't think there was any opening to diplomacy. We talked about it, we didn't see anything. You have to create openings for diplomacy. All wars end in some form of diplomacy, but you have to create that. And sadly, in this case, I think it's going to be through battle. Where we are now, and this is a real test for all of us, is that the US is the biggest supporter on Ukraine by far. It may have tilted towards the Pacific, but it's absolutely essential in terms of that. I think in Europe, so I thank everyone for their tax dollars that are going to that. It seems to be really important to me. The UK is number 2, as you'd expect, in terms of support. Number 3 and number 4 are interesting in terms of effect. It's probably, talking about those multiple layers, it's probably Microsoft, because they moved the Ukraine government onto the Microsoft cloud, allowing them to protect Ukraine as an information-based state, which all states are. And then, love him or hate him, it's Starlink and Elon Musk, assuring the continuity. There are some downsides to that, but it's been absolutely crucial in terms of technology. So if I use that, then you can see, okay, you're talking about the most thing that's, you think of it as a state thing, land war in Europe, far away, but actually it's bound up with California, with technology, with Microsoft too, and you get a sense there of how we try to connect in modern politics across the private sector, across governments, and other actors to achieve effect.
Thank you. I mean, let's take the conversation to California, to where we are here at Los Angeles. Jerry has mentioned that California is now the 4th largest global economy in the world. LA at the same right as I'd say a top 20 global economy. James, could you say a little bit about where you see the opportunities for the UK-California relationship?
Funny enough, I think of 3 countries together, or 2 countries, 1 large state. California being the state. The other one is the UK, the other one is Japan. And what we have in common is that there is a large continental landmass, in our case Europe, in your case the rest of the United States, in Japan's case China, etc., that thinks we're a bit weird, we're a bit different. So we have some difference in common, which I think is also bound up with some of the drivers of success in terms of how the rest of America thinks about California. I think that's a positive thing, by the way, not an insult, that shared thing. So I do think there's an opportunity to try and develop deeper relationships between the UK and California. Of course, there'll always be the overarching relationship with Washington. It's the United States. But I think we do need to build on this, and that's one of the big reasons why I'm here, as we try and move beyond a capital-to-capital view of the world.
So, a large part of what we do at the British Consulate is developing those links, relationships at a local level, at a state level, at a city level. We cover, in addition to Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii, very different states. And a lot of what we do is around prosperity. So, just by way of example, we are working on some different economic MOUs. One of our ministers visiting, for example, in December announced the one that the UK is working on with California. We're doing one with Utah as well. And another example I just like to sort of set out is an agreement the UK signed with the City of Los Angeles on transport, so how we can work together on areas like decarbonisation, on innovation, on policy issues. So I think the core of what we do is subnational engagement. And that's also, I think, a core theme in Los Angeles. I thought it was very interesting when I arrived that LA was the first city to have a deputy mayor of international affairs. That's something I think the Pacific Council has championed. And we now have the president's appointed a special representative on subnational diplomacy. So I think that really goes to your point, James, on networks, the power of the federal, local, city networks. Could you say a little bit more about how can leadership at different levels work together to really realise the opportunities of setting out the value of democratic engagement? How do we inspire those human factor ideas that you talked about? How can we best work together to do that?
I think one really important thing in building alliances is a sense of reliability, that the other side will be there. The UK has had a turbulent period of politics following Brexit. I think there are aspects of the UK that nonetheless should reassure partners that will be there. The kind of stability of the state, the way the institutions work and address change. This is easier for me to say than Emily as a representative of the government, but when we had a prime ministership that didn't work out, it lasted 46 days. which I thought was pretty efficient in terms of at least restoring some outward-facing stability. I think for these layered relationships, it's hugely reassuring for partners who are trying to make, for example, difficult decisions on climate, when we see states committed to that, like a big state like California, and driving that forward. It sort of implies that we're not going to find ourselves out there on our own, having hamstrung our own industries in pursuit of these goals, while others then reverse those political decisions. So I think that it can add to the real stability, resilience, and strength of alliances by having these layers that show that we're locked into things together.
Thank you. And just touching on perhaps a wider issue that you referred to at the beginning, one area of threat, if you will, but something that is on everyone's mind, both at local level and international, climate change. And I've seen, certainly, that's an area where the UK and Los Angeles have been very interested to work together, whether it be the MOU on transport that I mentioned, but also seeing actually the interaction of cities and global partnerships like C40. James, could you share a little bit about what you're seeing from a Ditchley perspective on issues like how cities, localities, states are coming together on issues like climate change?
Sure, Emily. One of the big issues we're focusing on at present is the availability of critical minerals and rare earths for renewables technology. And it seems to me that this is an area of huge potential to work together across boundaries. Those who are not into the detail of this, I'm not particularly, but I do understand from our sessions that for batteries, for example, there's the question both of the availability of the raw materials, lithium, for example, and the processing, which is dirty. And China has a strong hold on all the bottlenecks in that supply chain, which is just a fact. So to achieve more stability behind our transition, we need to address that. No country, no state can do that on their own. We need to build kind of rich partnerships, a rich ecosystem around these value chains to be able to do that. So I think there's that angle. There's also the obvious things that I think California has already seen huge growth in the renewables sector. But you have sunshine, you have windy deserts, and you have a lot of technology expertise. That's a winning combination to try and drive things forward. And I think we'd love to see cooperation around that and moving that forward.
Great, and just one final question from me. So the Ditchley Foundation has been described as a storied institution, lots of history, which you also alluded to as well. How is the foundation looking to best build on that legacy in terms of developing those new networks that you talked about at different levels?
Well, thanks very much. We're at a sort of really critical and interesting point in Ditchley's history, with a very powerful future ahead of us. I've spent 6 years, as Jerry alluded to, building a 21st century institution, but doing it in a way, hopefully, that keeps the best of the past. The way we think of that for the UK is a kind of metaphor. Try and keep the past, the bits we really value, the traditions, the feel of it, but at the same time, lever the best of technology to increase our impact. And so we've invested heavily in weaving it into the 18th century fabric of the building when we do things at Ditchley. Audio-visual technology. It's essentially a modern digital TV studio woven into the Palladian 18th century house. And in data technology to try and understand people behind the scenes, understand networks of people. Having got that, and having sort of built out to where we are now, so we've expanded our program a lot, we're embarking on the next stage of expansion. And at this point I want to pay tribute to the Wills family. David Wills founded Ditchley, as Jerry mentioned, in the 1950s, took his fortune, it became passion, and put far more of his own money than he should into Ditchley, as well as requesting the house to the foundation, the house of the core of the estate. And someone who's very close to Kerry and I, Catherine, David's daughter, died sadly quite young, at 71 last year, and Catherine had become very invested in the project did not have direct heirs, and has further enriched Ditchley by making Ditchley her main beneficiary. So we're sort of coming here at a point of springboard and optimism, saying we can push out, we can build out networks. We know what we don't want to do. We don't want to build a bureaucracy. We don't want, think tanks are great. There's a lot of scope for good think tanks, but there are a lot of work going on. We want to work on this connective tissue across the democratic world, and we think we're in a really good place to do that. So we hope to expand further, build our networks into other regions, but really reinvest, deeply invest in the US and in our core friendships as well.
Great. So I think we're going to move on to some questions.
We can just take questions from the floor. I think, are we running microphones around so people can, this is such a big room.
We just have the two, so I think we just have the two.
Okay, so let's, then you ask
Walk
questions.
around.
No, that's okay.
Good to get some exercise.
Use your outdoor voices in asking your questions. That's all I can ask. And I can, if we hear them, we can repeat them. So let us, John.
I'll try my best to use my...
It's a former Marine. That was a very good choice. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you for both of your remarks. I wanted to bring you back to the first thing you said, which was a dream factory, story, narrative. I'm listening to the comments you made and all the different activities that both the UK government as well as the Ditchley Foundation are undertaking. Can you kind of wrap that all back together? Because I work at the RAND Corporation, and a lot of what we do is so focused on what is happening today, in terms of our relationships between our countries, so focused on what's happening in Ukraine. And I'd love to go back to my desk later today and think about the image and the story and the narrative that you're trying to put together beyond and after this conflict. Thank you.
James, do you want to say a little bit about the Dream Factory? You coined the expression, and then I can come in with a few other reflections.
Okay, well, I'll begin with a sort of personal anecdote, which is Kerry and I don't know how I'm persuaded to do this, once bought a Dunkirk little ship. If anyone's seen the films of Dunkirk, it's one of these sort of little boats they towed out and took the soldiers off the water. And it's a wooden boat, and it fully lived up to the old adage that a boat is a hole in the water into which you pour money. So as a financial decision, it was terrible. As an emotional thing, I like Dunkirk moments. We've had some grim times in the last few years as democracies. We've seen obviously 9/11 here, precipitating terrible loss of life, precipitating a global campaign against terrorism with its own problems and unforeseen consequences. We've had the great financial crisis, which really destroyed confidence in globalization and really undermined moderated market-based capitalism, I think, under a lot of our people. So I think we've seen that. And then we saw, as I described, the kind of rise of China and culminating with the Olympics and going forward, and the sense of an unstoppable ability to churn out stuff and to control the future, and a confidence there. And then we had the pandemic where we looked pretty bad. Here mask wearing became a political issue. In the UK, in the end we ended up all right, but we were shaky at the start. We were trying to bluff our way out of it. And all of those things, everything has a time and a time. So my kind of narrative is, okay, we've learned from that. That's the power of a democracy. The parties are learning. I'll give you a local example in the UK. The Labour Party has returned to the political centre. It is now trying to make itself ready for government. The Republican Party is going through its own kind of transformation. I can see watching here and think thoughts about the future. So there's a learning process in democracies which authoritarians cannot match. And they can call the odds for a while, and then what you then find out, as with Putin, is that when they make the worst decision in the world, there is no one who dares stop them within the system. So I would like a narrative where we say we've had some knocks, but we're back, we're moving forward, we've learned, and we're going to be more innovative, more prosperous, fairer as well than we have in the past. And because of that, we will prevail and move on as we always have.
I can add a few thoughts on that. The importance of trying to inspire, because I think that's at the heart of addressing a lot of the issues that we're looking to make progress on. I mean, coming to Los Angeles, obviously the power of film and Hollywood looms large. We at the Consulate actually spend quite a lot of time on UK-US links on the film industry, both on production in the UK, investment in the UK as well. So that's a big part of what we do, and the economic impact is really, really important. I should add that the UK is also a top 3 global centre of production for anyone interested in coming to the UK and seeing those films take shape. But what we've also sought to do, our consulate in LA, we're not a big consulate, I should say, so we look for different ways to do it, is how do you take the power of film and TV to make progress on the issues that we care about. I'll give you an example. So climate change and the run-up to COP26, hosted in Glasgow. You know, we across our network, both in the US with our embassy, also around the world, was using all available levers to really shine a light on this issue. So we look to do that with the film industry. Just before COP26, we partnered with Netflix. So they curated all of their climate change content in one place that anyone, and Netflix have got quite a big, powerful global audience, going on could see all those climate change films in one place, with the aim of trying to inspire people to take that issue seriously. On Friday, I visited a Los Angeles school where we'd helped facilitate a partnership between the Northern Irish charity Cinemagic, who brought their film experts in to teach LA school kids how to put a film together, and that was all based around those kids writing a story on climate change, what they were seeing in the community, how it was affecting them, with the aim of inspiring. And once that film is finished, I think in the next month or so, it will be premiered in an LA school, submitted to film festivals. And so there are different ways that we're trying to use the power of inspiring to make progress on those issues. And I think that adds to the Dream Factory. I think local examples together with national ones is a small way that we can make progress on things like that.
Other questions? Ambassador Martinez, please, you are diminutive, but, oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to use my outdoor voice.
Thank you.
It's clear that democracy is under attack and being challenged in different ways. But I think one of the very serious ways in which it will continue to be threatened is the immigration policies. And I'm not talking just about the United States. I think all over Europe we see these conflicts. In Latin America we see these conflicts. So I would certainly suggest to Ditchley, and I honor being there many years ago when I was then running the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, and you had a seminar on racialism in those days. But I do think that committed as we are to democracy, it isn't clear that democracy will prevail. And from my perspective, of course, I want democracy to prevail, but I think the intersection of democracy with, among other things, immigration policies is something that I would commend to do a study.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. I mean, I agree with you strongly. We had a really interesting seminar conference in October on the impact of the looming food crisis on migration, which can only drive more migration. But the other thing we got into there was the demographics. As you know, we had an Italian member of parliament as one of the discussants, one of the people there. Large areas of Italy have no children. It literally is dying away. Empty villages, they're trying to revive them. France has tried social policies for decades to try and drive French families to have more, encourage French families to have more children. It's not working. It's moved it a bit, but not enough to get anything like the replacement level of 2.1. So there's a simple demographic fact. The United States is one of the few democracies, developed industrialized democracies, whose figures actually look good. And that's all down to continued immigration and the vitality that brings. So European countries are going to have a kind of like stark choice. Accept more migration, manage it better, or see their GDP, their numbers just dwindle away as the population ages. And that's something we're all going to have to grapple with. So I thought from that conference, you're right, that we need to keep on this basic issue of demographics. As you, I'm sure all know, China has now tipped the hill after years of growing population. And that trend is just disastrous for the country, because it has no obvious route for migration to replenish. So it's going to be a very different country. Get old before it gets rich is what they face. So I think you're absolutely right.
Carol,
Thank you so much. This is really fascinating. And
loud.
thank you. This has been very fascinating. And I was struck by your comments in the earlier part of your remarks that about China's efficiency of building roads and bridges. And of course, we all know about the concern about their investment in Africa, for example, other countries as well, which initially created a lot of excitement about the roads and bridges. But as it turns out, it's kind of having a backlash because they're not employing the local residents, citizens of those countries. But moreover, in fact, the airports are sort of falling apart, as are the roads. So they maybe have a 10-year life of those infrastructures that they're building. So in a sense, they're not really so efficient as they had initially seemed to be. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that feels right to me as well. That's what we sort of hear too, that there is a disenchantment with the Chinese investment. It was powerful to, we need a port, we need a road, we need a bridge, we need a train track. Then they arrive, they build it in double quick time, but they don't bequeath the ability to maintain it. And of course, then the finance starts becoming onerous as well as the framework changes. I think we are missing collectively a huge trick. Western governments are struggling to make the necessary airtime for Africa. There's just too much on their plate. I think that people were telling me the kind of White House is spending 5% of its time in the National Security Council, whatever, on development issues. The rest on China, the war in Ukraine, and of course, we haven't even talked about the looming crisis with Iran coming up. So there are these hot crises, while at the same time, what we really need to do is to kind of like win back Africa. We are going to hold in October, I think, it's either October, a conference in entrepreneurialism in Africa. And the reason for that is that that's what Africans want to talk about. There is a blooming of business, and that is our opportunity to try and engage with that. And I think it should be really private sector led as much as anything. There is huge opportunity. There are obviously also huge problems in terms of transparency and corruption and how that's managed. But I think there is a scope for greater engagement by the private sector across the state and the regional level, as well as much more so than top down.
Sir.
Just a quick question. Thank you both for coming here today. I really appreciate the time. I like the fact that talking about the U.S. and the U.K. special relationship and how that really has been the bedrock of kind of international security since the post-World War II period. And part of that is we look to redevelop and kind of refine, make democracy more palatable. A lot of that comes down to economic growth and development. With the inability to kind of secure a trade deal with the EU, that kind of puts the UK in a little bit of a stressful situation there. Is there talks of looking at new chances of bilateral trade deals with the United States and the UK? And then also, is the UK looking more towards the Commonwealth into being more than just kind of a symbolic organization and more of a way to kind of spur economic development, building on the African comments that you just made?
Emily, do you want to go or shall I will go afterwards.
Absolutely.
I'll let you say officially.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I should say we do have a trade deal with the EU, tariff-free, quota-free access, and very strong trade relationships there. On the US side, you mentioned trade deal. The UK would like to secure a trade deal with the US, but part of our core policy approach is to look to develop trade at different levels. So in addition to seeing how we can deepen it at a federal level, and it's not just about a trade deal, the UK has been working with the US closely to remove barriers to trade. For example, the first shipment of lamb for 25 years came to the US quite recently. So there's a range of different ways to deepen that trade relationship. But the other part of it is strengthening local and state trade relationships, and that goes to the point I made earlier about economic MOUs. So a few have been signed with different states around the US. There are more that are being worked on right now. I mentioned Utah and California earlier. So it's kind of critical for us really to think about how we work across a number of different mechanisms to deepen that relationship. I mean, there is no stronger partnership, I think, economically than between the UK and the US. I mean, the figures are quite outstanding in terms of the number of Brits that come to work for American firms and vice versa. The UK is the second largest investor in California. I don't think that's a very well-known fact, creating just under 100,000 jobs in the state. 68% of that is in Southern California. There is actually a parallel event going on as we speak over the road where our North American Trade Commissioner has visited and is talking to leaders on the extent of the UK's investment in California. And tomorrow we're actually launching a network of British investors into California with the aim of leveraging networks to encourage more British firms to come to California, help create jobs, but also make the most of opportunities like LA 2028 coming up. So I think, for us, free and fair trade is win-win for both parties, and that's an approach that the UK is looking to really make more of around the world with partners like the EU, free trade deals like the one with India being looked at the moment, but also looking at how we can deepen that partnership with the US as well. I should say, sorry, you asked about the Commonwealth, obviously core for the UK, and I like the mention of your Africa conference. Actually, one of the jobs that I did before going on maternity leave, just before I came out here, was on an Africa investment conference that the UK set up to bring in countries from around Africa to the UK to look at how the UK can increase its investment. And at that point, it was a few years ago, but the UK had the ambition to be the largest investor in Africa, going back to the importance of investing and helping create local jobs in that kind of partnership. Thanks.
Just a quick gloss on that to say, I don't think trade deals are decisive for the UK as a services-dominated economy. So most of the trade deals aren't going to make a massive difference to GDP, and they're replacing what we had before. So it's important bureaucratic work that has to be done. I think that's true in the US as well. I don't think there'll be a trade deal, but I don't think that matters. I think, as Emily said, there's lots that can be done at different levels to build things up. On the EU, it does feel like we've reached a kind of moment where we're out of the EU. That's done. That's done for more than a generation. I think so. That's what we are where we are, and most people now kind of accept that. Perhaps there's a few die-hard fundamentalist Remainers who still think we could get back, but we can't. But there is a general sort of sense across those who wanted to leave and those who wanted to stay that we need to kind of now get beyond this and make it work more smoothly. And we're sort of involved in some of those conversations across those divides as to what does that mean. It's mainly really boring stuff. It's mainly like not the actual tariffs, it's how the procedures are implemented, which is a big drag on the efficiency of trade in both directions. So we need to kind of do some housekeeping work on that, I think. The bigger issue underlying this, which is a huge challenge for all industrialized countries apart from the US, and I think sort of California also skews this in the US, is the productivity challenge and the growth challenge. There's a huge amount to be done on that and how that drives forward, because productivity growth is kind of not where it should be and needs urgent attention. And there's a hot debate about what that should mean. Where does that come from? The Prime Minister Truss's government had a go at cutting taxes to try and drive it that way. Obviously, it wasn't sustainable in the markets, but it did leave hanging. Okay, what's the question? Where is the growth going to come from? From within the country, a shared problem with the EU and others. I think the US is doing still well on that compared to others.
Other questions? Sir?
Yeah, thank you for both. Just from a more tactical perspective, Consul General, you've mentioned a few things you're doing with Hollywood, and how have you seen good examples of the subnational level? What are actionable for this group? What are actionable steps to take and work together and below trade deals and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Sorry, I forgot the mic. I think that's a really good question, and I think it does depend on the issue and the levers in question. So, I refer to the economic MOUs that help set a framework, but ultimately you've got to bring that to life. And it depends on the sectors that you choose. We have actually on the ground, just on the trade side, a network of advisors that can help advise companies on how, for example, they can trade and invest with the US and vice versa. So I think it does depend on the issue and also how we talk about it. I think the key thing that I'm really keen on is that we don't work in silos, that we're constantly talking to organisations like yourself, businesses on the ground, what are they experiencing, so we can make sure that any initiatives that we do is actually helpful and has impact, and there's an area that government can make a difference. I think the network point is really key. I think, at the heart of what James was saying was around networks. At the heart of what the Pacific Council does, I think it's around networks. At the heart of what we do as diplomats is networks, bringing people together around the issues that we care about. And the example that I mentioned, something that we're launching at my residence tomorrow, is this network of British investors, because we shouldn't be doing things on our own. The more that we can come together with people, the easier it will be, learn from experience, and I think that applies across a number of different areas. So in some ways I put the question back to you actually on how we can do that better and how we can do that in partnership over the coming months as well.
Let me give you one example, if I may. James has I know James's staff pretty well, and not every time, often they will have a conference and his staff will come to me and say, we're looking for somebody from California. I regard that as such a remarkably powerful opportunity. I don't always deliver, but I never ignore them and I never say no. And from our perspective, this notion of subnational diplomacy, we would like Californians at the table. And our mission as an organization, the Pacific Council, is we would like to give voice to those of us who live here, most of whom are like Peter and I from Boston originally. Talk about immigrants, this is an immigrant city. But Californians do bring frequently a special perspective. It's funny, at Ditchley, our prestige member is Pam Brady, who wrote South Street. And every time I talk to the people at Ditchley, they all want to hear about Pam Brady and South Street. We have all of these former ambassadors and business people and captains of industry and so forth, but there's something magical about that particular industry, which is important. So in a sense, we're already doing it, and who do I recommend? All of you, our members. So Emily's exactly right. This notion of networking is really, really powerful. And I can go around the table and pick out what you all do and sort of highlight what's so special and distinctive about this and why it's of interest, to places like Ditchley and so forth. I don't know if any of you know Jim Costa, Congressman Costa. Any of you know him? Well, there was a meeting on food security, and Ditchley approached me. I said, well, what about a congressman farmer? I mean, this is a congressman from the Central Coast who's also a farmer, a second or third generation farmer. And typically it didn't work out because his staff wouldn't allow it to. But this was an interesting reference point, and the fact that California has something like that is really, really interesting. So that question is the essence of what we are as an organization. So I couldn't help but offer a comment because that's kind of all I think about.
Just a quick comment on that. Jerry, I think you mean South Park.
What did I say?
South Street, South Park.
Sorry,
But
that's not what
the reason,
I am.
yeah, the reason we know Pam is not South Park. It's South Street.
Don't tell Pam I got it wrong.
The reason, but Pam, the real reason we like Pam is that she wrote Team America. For those of you seen it, which has a kind of, for an organisation that's dedicated to increasing our international understanding, we can't resist the irony of that. So that's good. The other thing I would say about Ditchley conversations, right at the beginning, I said when David Wills was founding Ditchley, he had one of his collaborators was the political philosopher, Isaiah Berlin. Isaiah wrote a sort of advisory note of what to do, and I keep it with me, a copy, I always remember it, where he said, it's a really good idea, we need to bring people together, but for goodness sake, don't make it a kind of normal conference. The think tank works are good, conferences are useful for academia and so on. We want conversations. And for it to be a conversation, we need some apparently irrelevant people, writers, musicians, choreographers, someone's going to come and bring real estate developers, someone's going to come and bring a different angle to what otherwise could be a conversation between the overly expert, which then locks it into the same thinking. And we're not talking about too many people, we're not talking about being actually irrelevant, but I think that I found that really to be the case. Chosen wisely, those kind of people can really enliven a conversation.
And just one follow-up thought. I think your question sparked lots of responses, which I think is a testament that it's an important question. I mean, the work that we do as a consulate here is seeing where it makes sense to partner together on certain issues. And we want to make sure that the UK is visible here, to talk about what we care about and how we make progress. But also what we look to do is relate back to the UK what's happening here, so that a network of decision makers can see what's happening in Los Angeles or in Utah or Hawaii, and encourage a flow of visits or wider collaboration between them. And on visits, Jerry talked about our ambassador coming this week, so we can show her, the opportunities, what's happening in this part of the world, why the embassy, how we can work with the embassy on that. Just to give you some wider examples, we had the Minister for Investments in the UK come out a couple of weeks ago. We had the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Transport come out to meet with organisations like the Port and talk about collaboration with LA Department of Transport and others. So I think what we're wanting to do is facilitate that network of visits and make sure that all aspects of that relationship is really strengthened.
We have time for one final question. Sir.
Thank you so much for joining us. Quick question, sort of tying a lot of topics together, but I was wondering if you might share your views on artificial intelligence and what sort of narrative might help us move in a positive direction there, how our nations might work together in developing artificial intelligence in ways that benefit workforce, working on climate change, how that might be of assistance, and any challenges you see down the road.
Thanks very much for your question. I hope you've got about another 45 minutes. This is one of my favorite topics. And in fact, our next kind of main Ditchley event for February, we're doing some work on Brexit, as I touched on, for the UK. Our main discussion is going to be on the latest wave of advances in artificial intelligence. And the specific impact we're going to look at is what people call generative AI, for those not familiar with it. It's got a lot of prominence in the last few weeks with ChatGPT, but as some of you will know, ChatGPT is the kind of tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bundle of companies coming through, and GPT-4 from OpenAI will come in February, March, and I think will blow everyone away in terms of its ability. So what this means is it's not general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, but it does another very human thing, which is it uses essentially statistical analysis to create the content that is most likely to follow the words you have put in, the questions you put in. The kind of like mini level, that means a few words after sentence completion. But this is then like, what's the next paragraph? What's the story inspired by the human prompts that you put in? And then it's also moved into images, to generate those images, and it will shortly move into video, being able to generate video on the fly at machine speed. What's different about this is it's not in the hands of universities. It's all in the private sector. There's huge backing by, say, OpenAI by Microsoft, but a lot of work within Google. But otherwise, people are trying to turn this into open source, and it will spread incredibly quickly. And I'm one of the people who believe that this will have as much impact as the internet again, in terms of how it changes things. It will be brilliantly powerful in terms of getting on top of information. It probably will replace search, so Google will become a fully artificial intelligence company. At the same time, it's going to be a complete nightmare in terms of the creation of disinformation. If you want a video on, a couple of years' time, if you want a grainy video footage of President Obama growing up in an African village, to fulfill the birther myth, you'll be able to turn that out in a couple of minutes, and it'll be all over. And it'll be very hard to control. So it'll be not only the internet again, but social media again. So huge opportunities in terms of productivity and how we drive that forward, and huge implications for state power and how states are going to need this. But huge, really calamitous, potentially kind of challenges on building on social media, on the internet in a really powerful way. So I think we need to do two things at once. We need to really accelerate because of the competitive angle, but also really accelerate our understanding of what this might mean and what smart legislation looks like, smart regulation.
Emily, I'm going to give you the final word. We always work very hard to end precisely on time, and I know James has got to drive to the desert, so I owe it to him a reasonable exit from Los Angeles. So, Emily, let us give you the last word, if I may.
Well, just to say thank you. Thank you to Jerry for facilitating this and his team. It's been brilliant. Thank you to everyone for coming, James, for your insights. And I hope that, it won't be another 10 years before the next one. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you both.